So, my name is Luciana Garejo. I am a senior majoring in product design, class of 2015, and I'll finally be graduating this December, so I'm very excited. And I'm really happy to be here to be talking to you about budgeting. I think it's one of my favorite topics. So with that said, why did I start budgeting? I'm going to tell you a little bit about when this happened and why it happened. When I was living back home, I didn't have much of my own money to manage. My family, my parents especially, were the ones taking care of our family's finances. I often worried about asking for things, things that I needed or things that I wanted, because I wasn't sure how that would impact my parents' expenses. I wasn't very aware of the details of like their income or their expenses. And so when I came to college, it was a very sharp transition between not having managed any money back home and having to manage my money here. I received money from my parents on a monthly basis, but it was up to me to figure out how I would need to spend it, what things I would need money for, and what amount of money I would be asking my parents for every month. And so coming to Stanford was definitely an adjustment period, especially freshman year, and along with having to adjust to a new lifestyle here on campus and having to adjust to learning a lot of things about living away from home, money was one of those things I also had to learn a lot about. And so I remember a couple of weeks before coming to Stanford, I went to a bank with my mom, and she got me a credit card, a debit card, and a savings account. And I was very excited. I felt very financially independent in a way, and at the same time very overwhelmed because I had no idea what any of these things meant. And I knew I was going to be away from home. I live on the East Coast in Virginia, and so any advice that I would get would be periodically maybe from my parents when I called home, whenever I had time. And so slowly I began to learn through a lot of trial and error what it meant to manage my own money. And I went through a roller coaster for that because I had no idea. And that's really how I got started and why I became interested in it. So you might be wondering, when should you start budgeting? I think money and budgeting are very personal things, and they really vary on your circumstances. So today I want to talk to you about the common practices for budgeting, and I will walk you through my own experience and my own current example so that you can see how to sort of follow through the process that I will talk about. First, I want to start with the benefits of budgeting. These are the things that you have to look forward to. When you learn how to budget, you avoid debt. You are able to build a good credit because of it. You can reach your long-term goals and also contribute to an emergency fund, which is very important, and also add to your savings, which will be very important in the long term after you graduate. So this is a 3-step process that I use in order to budget on a monthly basis. The first thing that I do is I calculate my monthly income. Next, I make a list of all the fixed expenses that I have on a monthly basis, and I also estimate the amount of money that I'm going to spend on a weekly basis so that I can have an idea of that for the month. So, as I start walking you through my own example, my current example, I want to tell you what my living situation is at the moment and also my situation as a student. I live off campus. This is my last quarter here at Stanford, so I wasn't guaranteed housing. I'm living in a big house with 8 other roommates. I share a room with my sophomore year roommate. We share the master bedroom in this house. And I commute to school. It's a 10 to 15 minute bike ride. I'm right by the golf course. And that's my main way of commuting. I have a few classes, so I'm here almost every day, but not for the entire day, and I mainly spend my time here on campus or I spend it at home. So that being said, my 2 main sources of income, my 2 only sources of income really, are my parents. They support me every month by sending me $100. And I knew that $800 would not get me through every month, especially here in Palo Alto. So I decided to get a job on campus. And And from that job, I make about $472 per month. And so that brings me to a total monthly income of $1,272, which is actually enough to get by. So that's how I calculate my monthly income. So most people, I think, in this room will have either a job, support from your parents. Some might have financial aid stipends. I know that I did. And so what I would do for adding this to your monthly income is I would take that the quarterly stipend that you get at the beginning of the quarter, and I would divide that by the number of months that you need it to sustain you. So that's one way to use that. Next, I look at the fixed monthly expenses that I have. I currently pay $800 in rent. I have a couple of subscriptions. I have Adobe Cloud. I am a product designer, so that's something that I use very regularly. And I spend $19.99 on that every month. I have Spotify. I love music and I can't live without it, so $9.99 every month goes to that. And finally, phone insurance. I have drowned my phone before, and so that was a very expensive thing to replace, and paying $9.99 every month seems like a reasonable thing to me to cover that in the event that it happens again. So my total for fixed expenses every month comes out to $839.97. And that's the second step. And the third step, some other fixed expenses that you might have would be car insurance if you own a car here on campus, your other subscriptions besides the two that I mentioned, rent if you live off campus like me, utilities. I am very fortunate that my utilities are included in my rent, and so that's not always the case. Memberships, and also paying off loans. So moving on to the third step, this is calculating and estimating your weekly expenses. Now this third step is by far the most complicated one and time-intensive one. So here I have gone ahead and created an Excel sheet, and this is an example of what my weekly expenses were from September 7th through September 13th. This was during a time when I was transitioning from having my summer internship at HP and moving back to this area closer to campus in order to start school. So what I've done here is I've reported my expenses every single day for that week. And the categories that I found that I spend in were groceries, meals, going out. I put clothes in there just in case, and transportation because I was mainly using Uber and Lyft to get around. And so it's off the screen, but I ended up spending around $20 in groceries that week. I spent $50 in meals, I spent $30 in going out, and I spent $50 in transportation. And so what I did with those estimates is I multiplied them by 4 to get an idea of how much I would be spending every month. And you can see that in the chart at the bottom. It's $80 for groceries per month, $200 for eating out, $120 for going out, and $200 for transportation. Yes?
So more than 4 weeks in a month?
Well, I estimated it out.
Okay.
Yeah. Other things that you might spend on a weekly basis, you might have gas to pay for, groceries, eating out, going out, and transportation are included in mine. So after doing that, I went ahead and I combined everything on one chart. I have my fixed expenses, my weekly expenses, and then my income. And the grand total is a deficit of $167.97. So that's not good. And what that meant was that I had to go in and reevaluate how I was spending my money. And luckily, the last paycheck that I got for the summer was about $1,500, and I made sure to keep that in my emergency fund. Because one of the things that I found is that whenever you go through a transitioning period, let's say from having your summer internship to going back to school or vice versa, you need to be prepared to make some emergency expenses. So I had that money, and I could very well have used that money to cover this deficit. But if this is the way that I'm going to continue spending every month, I will have a deficit every month, and I will be using up all the money in my emergency fund. So the emergency fund was really not the way to go, and it's also not an appropriate use of using your emergency fund. And I'll go into that later. So what I did is I had to make adjustments to my expenses. And the first thing that I did was I looked at my fixed expenses. And my rent is not negotiable. My phone insurance is something that is more important to me than my subscriptions. So I looked at my Adobe Cloud subscription and Spotify. And together those subscriptions give me about $30 that I could save every month. But that wouldn't cover the deficit that I have. So then what I did is I looked at, okay, what are my weekly expenses and how could I modify those? I'm spending more than twice as much on meals, on eating out, than I am in groceries. That's probably something that I can fix. I'm spending $120 on going out and $200 in transportation. And I found these three bottom categories to be the ones that I wanted to reevaluate. So what I did is I looked at my meals and I realized that, let's say I'm eating out and buying something here at Treehouse or Coho or Subway every day. Maybe that's around $7 for on average for a meal. And if I'm eating every day, then that's about $50. And so I don't necessarily have to buy a meal. I can make my own meals. So I could afford to cut the $200 that I spend in meals by half into $100 by eating out maybe 3 times a week. And the rest of the time, substitute that with making my food at home. And so by doing that, I also have to think about increasing the amount that I spend on groceries a little bit. So instead of $80 a month, I said $120. For some of you, you might be thinking $120 is still a very low amount of money to spend on groceries every month. But factoring in my situation, it is doable. Because I live with 8 other roommates, we sort of adopted a co-op style way of living. And so at the beginning, when we started living together, we went on a Costco run and made sure that we bought all of the things that we use for groceries and that we have in common. And so I'm able to only spend this additional amount, $120, on the things that we don't have and that we don't share. Next, I looked at my going out budget. As a student, I'm mostly focused on my academics. I will probably go out mostly on campus, which doesn't require me to spend too much money on going out. As someone who's over 21, I still like going out to downtown Palo Alto, especially as a senior. And so, realistically, I will still go out off campus, but I don't need to go out and spend $120 every month. So maybe I can just cut that in half and spend $30 going out twice a month off campus. So that's what I went ahead and did. And then for transportation, well, I'm mainly moving back and forth between campus and my house, so I don't need to spend $200. I also am fortunate enough to live in a house where 5 of my roommates own a car, and if I ever need to get somewhere, I could ask them. And we have a great transportation system in the area, so I could use that as well. So I budgeted around $15 to get around to other places other than campus and home for every week. And making all those adjustments came out to $260 that I could save every month. And so by looking again at the summary of my expenses and my income, I am no longer in a deficit, and I actually have $92 left over every month. So what do I do with those $92? Well, let's look back at the benefits of budgeting. The first 2, I avoided debt. I'm no longer in a deficit. That probably means that it's helping me build good credit because I'm paying off all of the charges on my credit card. And then we have the last 3. And that's really what I want to contribute to with those $92 that I have left. I take the emergency fund as a priority because I believe that I've always had a lot of emergency expenses. So what I do is I put half of the money that I have left over, whatever that may be on a given month, I put that into my emergency fund. And then I look at my long-term goals and my savings, and I treat them equally. So I put the remaining money and I split it between those 2. So I have $23 going to each one. Now, some of the uses of your emergency fund are medical emergencies, expensive plane tickets home, We all sometimes wait last minute to buy those tickets, and even though we know on average how much it costs to go back and forth between home, waiting that last bit causes you to pay more. A rent deposit. Sometimes you know ahead of time like how much a rent deposit will be when you know where you'll be living in the future. But for example, for me, after graduation, I might have to move very quickly and not know how much to budget for that. So I would use my emergency fund to pay for that rent deposit. Increase utilities if you ever go over what you have budgeted for. And extra textbooks and materials here on campus if you're as a college student. It's important to use your emergency fund for things that are like these, that are very important, very unexpected, and they tend to be pricey. So what I like to do is I like to make sure that I have at least $500 minimum in my emergency fund at all times. And that is just to cover for all of these pricey expenses. Next, long-term goals. These are things that you can estimate ahead of time. So for example, a plane ticket home, you know how much that will cost you. A tuition bill, your car deposit, you've probably been looking for quite some time to buy a car, or a new bike. So I'm going to take the example of a bike for me, because I've been using my bike for the past 4 years and it's about to fall apart. It squeaks every time I ride it to school and back. And so once I get a job, I'll probably be looking to buy a new bike. And based on the amount that I paid for my previous bike, I think I'll be spending around $350 if I buy a new one. And that divided, let's say, by 4 months, if that's when I'll need it, is around $87.50 that I need to save every month. Looking at the long-term budget that I have from before on a monthly basis, I saved $23 that's dedicated to my long-term budget. So it's not very realistic for me to think that I can put $87.50 towards this one. So one of the things that I do is reevaluate your emergency fund, long-term goals, and your savings budgets. When I look at how much I need to put away for this bike every month, it's almost as much as I have left over for all of these 3 funds every month. So then, that's not really feasible for me. And so I have to go to the last step, which is reevaluate the time before purchase. Maybe I'm going to need more than 4 months if I want to save up for this bike. But if I want to reach that $350 goal, it'll probably take me about 15 months to save up for this bike, which is not realistic if I have to get that bike pretty soon. And so there are a few things you could do. You could, if you absolutely need it in 4 months, you can look to your emergency fund, take the money out from there. It'll be pretty pricey. But I would recommend that to be the very last thing that you do, because there are alternatives to this commuting need. Basically, you could look for a cheaper bike. Maybe one of your friends is getting rid of their bike. You can look to use public transportation. So what I would do, and what I'm probably going to do, is I'm going to look for a cheaper bike. The quality of my bike is not that important, and in that way, I will be able to pay for that a lot quicker and not use my emergency fund. The last place that you'll be putting this $92 into is your savings. Now, some of the things that I want to say about savings is I have 4 points of advice. The first one being, add to your savings every month. Even if it's a little bit, it can be $5, $10 as a college student. If you have a job, it can be $100. What you see fit after you do this budgeting. The second one is, once you deposit the money, pretend that money doesn't exist. One of the mistakes that I made through my first years here in college was that I would pay my credit card. I would see that I didn't have enough money to pay my credit card, and I would take my money out of my savings and transfer it to pay my statement every month. And so I had money going back and forth between my credit card and my savings, and there was that's not the way you should be using your savings. Because the point of your savings is to increase over time. And so what I started doing eventually junior year, once I learned that, I started putting money in and pretending it didn't exist. And now I have a pretty nice amount of money in my savings, which I'm very happy about. And then the last 2 points would be to just treat your savings over time as a fixed expense. once you get the hang of budgeting, it's easier to treat your your contribution on a monthly basis to your savings. And so in that way, you always make sure that you're putting some money in there. So before I wrap up the presentation, I think 3 points to take away for budgeting would be to be open to keeping track of your money initially and hang in there until you get the hang of it. Another thing would be to also be open to changing your habits. I think that's probably the most important thing. Managing your money is about making sacrifices and changes to your habits. It's a little difficult at first. I was a little stubborn at first, but that's really what's going to help you have a system for your money, and that's ultimately going to bring you peace of mind. And then the last thing would be to just make sure that you start out with a simple way of keeping track of your money. The Excel sheet is different compared to, let's say, budgeting tool like Mint from Intuit. But from my experience, this is what a budgeting tool that I just started using. And if I didn't know how to manage my money in a very simple way using an Excel sheet, and if I didn't know more about my habits and how I spend my money, this would be so overwhelming. Not just that, but also knowing my habits, I'm also able to tell in which ways this budgeting tool works and in which ways it doesn't. And I think that's really important because, for example, the way that Mint works is that it is you input your information from your bank accounts. So right now it keeps track of my savings, the money I have in my savings, my credit card, and my debit card. And every time I pay and I have a transaction, Mint will categorize that automatically for me. So it is helping me so that I don't have to do that for every single expense. But what happens, and when you run into a problem, sometimes it categorizes an expense it puts it in the wrong category. And so then I have to make sure that I keep track of it so that it learns how to do it correctly. And I wouldn't know that and I also wouldn't be willing to spend that much time if I didn't already know what works for me without this budgeting tool. So I recommend these things after you become comfortable with your own money and how you spend it. And that concludes my presentation. Move into questions.
So on the point where you said, where you're talking about paying off credit card balances with savings, I think that definitely makes sense, but the savings accounts are going to be paying only 1% or less interest, and credit card debt is extremely high interest. So I think if anyone does have savings and credit card debt, you should use your savings to pay off your credit card debt, or else you're just costing yourself money unnecessarily.
Right, but I think it also, you shouldn't use it every month to pay off your credit card debt. I think that if you have to use it often, like I used to use it almost every month at first when I was learning how to use my accounts and my money. And that's actually the source of the problem, was that I didn't know how to budget. And so I was running into a deficit every month and then having to take that money out of my savings.
What would you say is the main difference between long-term goals and savings? Would savings just be really long-term goals?
I think of savings as really long-term goals. So for example, a down payment for a car after graduation would be something that I would be putting towards my savings, that I would use my savings towards. A long-term goal would be something more like a flight home. Yes?
What were your monthly expenses for sort of the weekly expenses? It was like 600 or so?
My weekly expenses?
Yeah, per month.
Per month? Those were about 400, close to 400.
Okay. Because if you're using 4 weeks per month instead of 4.4 weeks per month, you're going to be off by 10%. And 10% seems like a small amount, but when you're looking at differences between income and expenses, a small difference in one of those big things can lead to a very large difference.
Right.
The difference between them. So if you're off by 10% and your expenses are $400, you're off by 40, which means your projected savings per month is really only 50. It's only about half.
Right, so it's really important it's going to take time to make sure that your budget is accurate for your habits. And also, it's going to take time to actually have fixed habits and to change your habits. And so, yes, to your point, yes, multiplying by 4.4 would be a big difference. but when you're first learning how to have a system, you can, round as you see fit to make those estimates.
What are your tips for like numbers of bank accounts, or do you have like a separate bank account for your savings and long-term goals?
No, so I only have those 3 accounts. I have my debit card, my savings, and my credit card, and the emergency fund, and then the long-term goals. I keep that in my debit card because I treat my savings as like dead money, money that I can't touch until I have a huge expense like a down payment on a house or a down payment on a car, that kind of thing. Yes?
Lucia? Oh, I'm sorry, one thing real quick. I noticed some people need to leave, so I just want to mention that we're going to do the
Oh yeah, should we go ahead and do that?
in a couple of minutes.
Okay.
But even more importantly is the clipboard going around so that everybody can check their email off. Okay, if you just make sure that you've checked your name or added your name and email to that, because we really want to, this is the first time we're doing these kinds of workshops, and we really value your feedback so that we can make them most appropriate for you. So if you can make sure your name's on that thing before you leave, I would really appreciate it, and we'll email you a survey. Okay? And then Lucia, I'll leave it to you whether you want to do the prizes now or later. We're here till 12:30 for anybody that continues to have questions, so we feel like I'm
Yeah, do you want more question and then we can see answers?
What budgeting tool do you recommend?
I'm sorry?
What budgeting tool are you recommending?
Mint? Mint by Intuit? The company Intuit? Yeah, so I have the app on my phone, and I also use it on my computer.
So one thing that I would add, for those of you who do accumulate enough savings, you may want to put those savings in a Roth IRA if you have earned income, and then you can get tax benefits if you're saving for retirement.
So budgeting does get more complicated as you leave this buffered lifestyle that we have as college students or as maybe graduate students. It's different. And yes, once you have a job, a full-time job, there are a lot of things that you need to consider to save for later on.